It started like any other routine traffic stop on a quiet stretch of road. A patrol car's lights flashed red and blue in the rearview mirror of an older model sedan, gently weaving between the lanes. The officer behind the wheel figured it was probably a case of distracted driving. Maybe someone elderly who just needed a quick warning and a friendly reminder to stay safe. But as he approached the driver's side window, he had no idea who he was about to meet. Inside sat an elderly woman, calm but confident, her silver hair neatly pulled back and her eyes sharp with quiet authority. She handed over her license with a polite smile, but there was something in her voice, something that made the young officer pause. This wasn't just someone's sweet grandmother out for a Sunday drive. Something about her presence demanded respect, even without saying a word. It wasn't until he glanced at her name and saw the small emblem tucked into her leather wallet that he realized who he was speaking to. The woman in the car was no ordinary citizen. She was one of the most powerful figures in the country, a sitting Supreme Court judge. And now he was the one in the hot seat. What happens next is a moment neither of them will forget. But what did she say when he asked the reason for her swerving? And why was she really out there driving alone that night? Stay with us. The story's just getting started. The officer stepped back slightly, still holding the license in his hand, his eyes darting from the name to the woman behind the wheel. It wasn't just the title that caught him off guard. It was the way she looked at him. Calm, measured, almost like she was studying him. He cleared his throat, unsure if he should continue with the usual protocol or apologize for the stop entirely. After all, how often does a local cop pull over a sitting Supreme Court judge? He asked the standard questions, if everything was all right, if she knew she'd crossed the lane lines a few times. She didn't get defensive. She simply nodded and explained that she'd had a long day in court, followed by a quiet evening visiting an old friend. Her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made you listen without even realizing it. Still, the officer couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than she was letting on. The dashboard cam caught everything, but even that footage couldn't capture the strange tension in the air. Why was someone of her status driving herself this late at night, without a security escort? And more importantly, why had her hands trembled just slightly as she reached for her license? He glanced again at the courthouse emblem stitched onto the leather folder on her passenger seat. Something didn't feel right, but pressing further might cross a line he couldn't come back from. Was he ready for what he might uncover? The officer stepped aside for a moment, pretending to review her information, but in truth, he just needed to breathe. The name on the license, Justice Helen Morrow, wasn't just any name. She had written opinions that shaped national headlines, and her face had appeared more than once on the evening news. Yet here she was, sitting alone in a modest car with no driver, no escort, and no sign she was expected anywhere. Something didn't add up. Officers weren't trained for moments like this. Sure, he could let her go with a polite nod and a warning, but curiosity gnawed at him. Why would a Supreme Court judge be driving herself through a remote area this close to midnight? He glanced at the back seat. No briefcase, just a warm-looking scarf and a legal folder, half-zipped, with papers spilling out. Meanwhile, Justice Morrow sat motionless, eyes locked on the rearview mirror, watching his every move. She seemed more alert now, tense, maybe even nervous. Not scared, but cautious. As if she'd been through enough situations to know when to speak and when to stay silent. Back at dispatch, the officer quietly called in the stop for record-keeping, leaving out her name. But something strange happened. His radio cracked for a moment, and then silence. It was like the signal had been jammed or redirected. He tried again. Nothing. Out here, in the dark stretch of road between courthouse halls and empty woods, something was clearly off. And the closer he looked, the more he realized this wasn't just about a traffic stop. This might be about something far bigger. The officer's hand hovered over the radio, unsure whether to try again or just let it be. The silence was unnerving, almost too deliberate. He glanced back at the elderly woman in the car. Justice Morrow hadn't moved, hadn't said a word in what felt like an eternity. The stillness between them grew heavy, and the only sound was the soft rustle of wind brushing through the trees. He finally stepped closer to her window, his voice quieter now, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile calm that had settled over them. "Ma'am," he started, but he couldn't finish his sentence. A low, eerie hum came from the car's engine, vibrating through the metal, a strange static he'd never heard before. Justice Morrow's eyes narrowed, her gaze flicking from the officer to the road behind him. "You've already called it in, haven't you?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, something more than just the quiet authority he'd felt earlier. The officer blinked, unsure how to respond. How did she know that? He glanced back at the squad car, then at his radio again. It was dead silent, his stomach twisted in unease. She leaned forward in her seat, her hand brushing the dashboard, as if checking something. "You should turn around," she said, her words measured, deliberate. "You're in more danger than you realize." Before he could ask what she meant, a set of headlights appeared in the distance, too far away to make out, but the glow was growing rapidly. The officer's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone on this road anymore. Justice Morrow's expression didn't change, but her grip tightened around the steering wheel. "I told you," she murmured. "You don't understand what's coming." The officer stepped back, instinctively reaching for his radio, but it was still dead. The headlights were closer now, and the unease he felt deepened into fear. Whoever was driving towards them, they weren't just passing by. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. And now, it seemed, there was no turning back. The headlights drew nearer, and the officer's pulse quickened. There was no way that car should be so close, so fast, not out here in the middle of nowhere. He glanced at Justice Morrow again. She hadn't moved, but her fingers were tapping rapidly on the wheel now, her gaze still locked ahead. She was calm, but something in her posture had changed. It was as if she knew exactly what was coming, and maybe, just maybe, had been expecting it all along. The car's engine rumbled like a predator approaching, and just as it seemed to pull into view, it swerved off the road, kicking up gravel and dust in a sharp, reckless turn. The officer barely had time to react before a dark, unmarked SUV skidded to a halt, blocking the entire road ahead. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a routine traffic stop anymore. Without thinking, he reached for his flashlight, aiming it toward the vehicle, but before he could shine it, the SUV's headlights snapped off. Complete darkness surrounded them. Even the moonlight seemed to vanish, swallowed by the deepening shadows. The officer's hand froze in midair. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a regular stop, and whoever was behind the wheel of that SUV wasn't just passing through. In the eerie silence that followed, the officer heard the soft click of a door opening from the SUV, but no one stepped out, and then, to his shock, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He spun around in a blur, his heart hammering against his chest, only to find Justice Morrow standing behind him, calm as ever. She had moved without him hearing a sound. "Get in the car," she said simply, her voice no longer the authoritative tone of a judge, but a sharp command. There was no room for argument. Now. The officer's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to question her, to demand answers, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition, and something darker. The kind of look a person gives when they know exactly what's at stake, when they understand the consequences of what's about to happen. Before he could say anything, she spoke again. "You're not safe here. Trust me, you don't want to know who's in that SUV." Her voice was low, almost a whisper now, as if they weren't alone anymore. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Something had shifted. The officer knew now, more than ever, that this was bigger than he could have ever imagined, and if he didn't act fast, he might not walk away from it. With a racing heart, he stepped toward the car, his hands shaking as he opened the door. Justice Morrow slid into the passenger seat, her eyes still fixed on the dark SUV ahead. The officer slammed the door behind him, and the engine roared to life. But as they drove off, his mind raced with questions. Who were the people in that SUV? Why had they targeted him? And why was a Supreme Court judge suddenly so involved? He didn't have answers, but one thing was clear: this was far from over. And as the headlights of the SUV disappeared behind them, the officer had the unsettling feeling that whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to stop until it tore everything apart. The car tore down the empty road, its tires screeching as the officer slammed his foot on the accelerator. His eyes flicked to Justice Morrow, who remained eerily calm despite the danger. Her gaze never wavered from the rearview mirror, her hand resting on the dashboard, fingers tapping in rhythm with his racing pulse. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to him, her eyes soft but intense, like she was weighing something, deciding whether or not to tell him the truth. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but heavy with weight. "They're part of something much bigger than you realize," she said. "A group that has infiltrated some of the highest levels of power, including the court itself. You've been pulled into something you can't walk away from." His heart skipped a beat. Was she talking about corruption within the government? Inside the court system? Everything inside him screamed to pull over and call for backup, but he knew better now. The reality of this situation was far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Ahead, the darkness seemed to shift. The officer barely noticed it at first, but then he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. He slammed on the brakes, tires squealing as they came to a screeching halt. A man in a long coat stood there, his face hidden by the hood, the light from the headlights barely revealing his features. The officer's breath caught. He recognized that figure, had seen him before, in brief news snippets, whispered rumors. A man who operated in the dark corners of the system. Justice Morrow leaned forward, her voice a low warning. "Do not get out of the car, no matter what happens." But the officer couldn't take his eyes off the man. He felt an overwhelming sense of inevitability, like they were all moving toward the same tragic end, each one trapped in their role. Before he could speak, the man in the coat raised his hand slowly, signaling for them to stop. "Get out of the car," the man said, his voice cool and measured, though there was an underlying malice to it. Justice Morrow's eyes flashed. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she replied, her tone cold and full of authority. She opened the door, and for the first time, the officer noticed how she moved, fluid, purposeful, like someone who had been here before. She stepped out of the car with a calmness that unsettled him. "Don't," he shouted, but she was already walking toward the man in the hood, unafraid. He couldn't follow her. His feet felt like they were stuck to the ground, his body frozen. The man in the coat spoke again, this time with an edge of impatience. "You don't understand, do you? The court is nothing. You are nothing. None of you are safe anymore." But as he finished his sentence, Justice Morrow did something unexpected. She turned to the officer, her eyes sharp and unflinching. "You were never meant to be part of this," she said, her voice unwavering. "You should have stayed out of it. But now, we have to finish it." The officer's mind raced. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This wasn't just about power or corruption. There was something more, something much deeper, and it all centered on her, on what she had become over the years, on the game she had been playing. Just as the officer's hand reached for the door, ready to pull her back into the car, everything around him went dark, completely dark. The headlights, the streetlights, the sky, they all vanished. The world had turned into a suffocating void. And in the darkness, the officer heard the faintest whisper in his ear, the one thing that shattered everything he thought he knew.